Nobody has more respect for women than I do. Nobody.
Hillary Clinton wants to abolish it, believe me. She wants to abolish our Second Amendment.
I think they didn't deny it. I don't think anybody denied it.
Other presidents did not call. They'd write letters, and some presidents didn't do anything.
Many people have come out and said I'm right.
You really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
Hello and welcome to Fallacious Trump, the podcast where we use the insane ramblings of Cheeto Benito to explain logical fallacies. I'm your host, Jim.
And I'm your other host, Mark. A logical fallacy is an error in reasoning that results in bad or invalid arguments. The logical fallacy we're looking at this week is Ignoratio Elenchi, also known as missing the point or irrelevant conclusion. And can I just say, Cheeto Benito is brilliant. I love that. It's so self-explanatory, isn't it? It's fantastic.
So missing the point is actually a really good name for this fallacy because it's a fallacy of relevance, and it's where someone provides an argument or some evidence that makes a point, and it can be a valid point, it can be a reasonable argument that they're making, it can be true, but it's not actually the point. It's not relevant to what's being discussed.
Right.
So if they've been asked a question, they're actually probably answering a different question, and they may be answering that different question very well, but it's not what's being asked.
Yep.
And if they're making the point themselves off their own back, then it is probably not what they're supposed to be talking about, or not really relevant to what they're supposed to be talking about.
In looking this up, apparently Aristotle said that this is the foundation of all fallacious arguments, that you're actually, the intent of most fallacies when you're using them in an argument is to answer and provide an answer that you want to provide that isn't necessarily the one that the questioner wants you to give. Or as we know it, politicians talking.
Yeah, and it literally means ignorance of refutation. So basically it means not really understanding how to refute a point.
Yeah.
So our first example is from 2017 when he was defending white supremacists after Charlottesville. And he said this.
I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this. There are two sides to a story.
Let's pretend for a moment that that's true. It's not. But, but whether the white supremacists had a permit for their protest during which they killed someone is not the point.
No.
In this press conference, he was being given the opportunity basically to condemn Nazis.
Yeah.
And instead he focused on paperwork.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
So, yeah. Even if he was true in what he was saying, it's not the important thing, and he's missing the point by making that point. As it turns out, actually, both sides had permits, but not very fine people.
No, no. And also the permit that they had wasn't to allow them to kill people.
No, they don't give out permits for that.
Oh, don't they? Oh, I thought that was being a white policeman in a...
Yeah.
Might have to edit that bit out.
So Trump's been doing this basically throughout. As to be fair, as Mark said earlier on, this is very common among politicians. So by no means is this limited to Trump. Yeah. But he is very good at it, and he's been using it throughout. He's been using it recently to talk about the Mueller report, which came out. The redacted version of the report came out the day after we released our last episode. Yeah. And so Trump tweeted just a few days ago. He said, "You mean the stock market hit an all-time record high today and they're actually talking impeachment? Will I ever be given credit for anything by the fake news media or radical liberal Dems? No collusion." So he is kind of conflating their impeachment with what a great job he's doing because the stock market is high.
And not only that, he's conflating the stock market going up with something to do with his presidency.
Yeah, I mean, it's very common for the stock market to hit an all-time high because the trend in the stock market over the last 100 years or so has generally been upwards. In the last, I looked this up briefly, and in the last 350 months, there's been about 170, 180 times where that month has had a record high.
Oh, wow.
So it's more common than not.
Yeah. So it's kind of one of his typical things where he just takes the claim for an ongoing trend.
Yeah, absolutely.
As he's had some direct effect on it.
Almost an inevitability of the stock market, and we're not in a recession, so it should be going up. It's anyway. Point is, whether the stock market's going up, whether he has anything to do with it, it is not relevant to whether he should be impeached, because the impeachment that everyone's talking about is because of all the crimes that he committed, which are laid out in the Mueller report, and nothing, in fact, to do with whether he has created or not a great economy.
Yeah.
So focusing on the economy and saying this is ridiculous that they're talking impeachment when the stock market's high is really missing the point of what everyone is talking about at the moment.
And it's a proper sleight of hand. It's it's a magician's distraction technique, isn't it? Where you just kind of go, look over here. I'm showing you this whilst I'm taking the wristwatch off your wrist. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is very close to a couple of other fallacies. Right. One that we talked about before, which is straw man. Yeah. Where you're pretending that your opponent holds a view that's actually easier to knock down. But that's not really what's happening here. It's not, that doesn't describe this particular fallacy because it's not about creating an easier argument to refute. It's just about slightly shifting the focus away from the main argument. Yeah. The other thing that is similar is a red herring, which we haven't talked about, but we will cover in more detail in another episode. But that is really more about taking the discussion off on a completely different track and distracting from it with something new. Yep. So that has its similarities, but it's mainly not this.
It kind of puts me in mind of answering when you're writing an essay or something in exam conditions and you've revised the wrong thing, and you go in and you start answering according to the knowledge that you have. So, you get asked to compare Prospero's The Magic in the Tempest with something else, and you've learned Hamlet, and you go in and you go, but the most important thing is how this is compared with the angst in Hamlet. And then you just kind of go off and do that and make a perfectly reasoned and self-contained answer, which on its own terms is absolutely fine and might be true and well thought out and well thought through and backed up with lots of examples. But it completely missed the point because it's not answering the question. So,
there's apart from the well-prepared and well-presented part of that, there's a bit of a call forward to fake news this week. So we'll come back to that.
Oh, okay. Right. Aha!
And now is the time, I think, for Mark's British Politics Corner.
So we are back in the heady days of the pre-general election from 2017, where Theresa May called an election in riding high in the polls, only to lose her majority and drag us through the last bunch of horribleness, which we've had a bit of a respite from because the MPs over here have been on holiday since they got a little bit of a reprieve from Europe. So anyway, this is Theresa May doing this par excellence in not answering the question by providing an answer to a different question.
Many people have said your manifesto is quite vague when it comes to how you're going to pay for your spending pledges. So let's see if we can get some clarity tonight. How are you going to pay for the extra £8 billion for the NHS?
Andrew, when I go around the country and talk to people about what we're going to do in government, what people want to know is, are we actually going to have the strong economy that enables us to pay for the NHS and pay for the public services that people want? Now, in our manifesto, we've put some examples of how we're going to change the way money is used. On winter fuel payments, for example, we will means test that, but that money will go.
The extra money for the NHS.
Into health and social care.
Where will the extra £8 billion come from?
Andrew, what we have done, if you look at our record, is shown that we can put record sums of money into the National Health Service at the same time as we're ensuring that we're building that strong economy. And that's what we'll do for the future. our economic credibility is not in doubt.
Well,
it's the Labour Party who's in the dock when it comes to economic credibility.
No, but the ability to answer this question may be in doubt, Prime Minister. Let me try one more time. Where will the extra $8 billion for the NHS come from?
So what's great there, I love that bit when she talks, which is what all politicians do, and Margaret Thatcher used to do it as well, which still annoys the hell out of me. It's calling directly by his first name, and in some way that. With Thatcher, it used to call upon her kind of head mistress kind of persona, so that she would browbeat the talker, rather than saying Mr. Neil or Sir. She'd just call it Andrew. You've been called into my office and you're asking these impertinent questions. And I love that bit. And the first time round, when he asks it, she says, I go around the country and talk to people. And what people want to know is are we going to have a strong economy that enables us to pay? No. What people want to know is, where's the money coming from? And so he tries that. And then she says, if you look at our records, so she also does in there a bit of an ad hominem, because she says, actually, it's the Labour Party who's economically irresponsible. We're better, and that's shorthand for doing all the speaking to. We are terrifically good at the economy. Labour will just tax and spend. They will have a magic money tree from which money will just appear, and there's no justification for it. And so she's not answering the question. His question wasn't, are you spending more than your predecessors? Which seems to be what she's answering. She's saying, take a look at our record. We put lots of money into the National Health Service. Again, what she's doing is a Trump-type thing. The trend for putting money into the National Health Service has been going up over the last 40 years. In fact, it's only gone down 3 times in the last 40 years. So it always goes up. That's not a thing that the Tories invented. That's just what governments do, because the cost of living goes up and the cost of running the NHS goes up. But the more people go into the employment market, then the money that comes out to pay for the NHS also goes up. But there's extra money coming from somewhere, and she's trying to imply, without having to provide a direct answer, that they are just better at making this money happen, so you need to vote for us. What's really nice is, so at no point does she actually point out where the money's coming from. She's answering a perfectly reasonable question. If the question was, are you better at this than other people, she seems to be answering that question. But at no point does she actually answer his question. And Andrew Neil is kind of a proper old school journalist with lots of time on his programme. So he actually asked the question 9 times more directly. That, taking no shit, just says, where's it going to come from? Where's it going to come from? And at no point did she say. It just went round and round. It's brilliant. The tone is almost, Andrew, you should know this. We've been through this many times before. Why don't you know? The onus is shifted.
Also, you're not asking the right question.
Yeah,
that's what she's trying to say. Is yes, you've asked that, but that's not what people want to hear.
That's right.
It's like when Trump says, "People don't want to see my taxes."
Yeah, and in fact, you can tell.
Asking him about his taxes.
Yeah, you can tell that May is doing this because she reverts to what's really important. So that's very well you asking me that question, but what's really important? I think what's really important is that what the people want to know. No, or the other thing she does is let me make this perfectly clear. or variations on that. And you know, as soon as she says that, if it's not poisoning the well, you know, as soon as she says that, she's going to be muddying the waters somewhat so that it becomes a little more opaque rather than absolutely clear. It's never absolutely clear when she says that. It's absolutely clear she doesn't want to answer your question, and she will answer the question she wants to answer. That seems to me to be the job of politicians, is to at all costs get their story across, and we've dealt with that with Ed Miliband and his argumentum ad nauseum, where at all costs, whatever the question is, he will give the same answer in order to ensure his message gets across to his own detriment.
I think it's an entire course at politician school, isn't it? How to answer the question you want to answer instead of the question you've been asked.
Yeah, and make it sound like you've done that. Fill up the space where in normal circumstances there wouldn't be enough time for the journalist to, like Andrew Neil does, to just go, well, hang on a minute, you haven't asked the question. And in doing so, burst the pomposity and the assumption that the politician is slightly above you. There seems to be this respect and kind of too much accord paid to politicians, and Andrew Neil doesn't buy that at all. He just says you haven't asked the question. He is of the school of Jeremy Paxman. The second example we're going to play here is probably the most famous version of this. This was from 1997. So Jeremy Paxman is another tenacious bulldog, terrier-like journalist who wants to get the answer to the questions he's asking. He at the time was on a program called Newsnight, which was a long-form kind of long-story journalistic investigation into the stories of the day. And he is interviewing Michael Howard, who had been Home Secretary until 13 days earlier than this interview. He had held a meeting with Derek Lewis, the head of the Majesty's Prison Service, about the possible dismissal of the governor of Parkhurst Prison because there had been riots and injuries and damage to the prison. And he was John Marriott. So Michael Howard was asked by Paxman the same question: did you threaten to overrule Lewis if he didn't dismiss Marriott? And here it is. This is the mother of all Elenchis, and also the self-contained how you counter an Ignoratio Elenchi. You just ask the same question over and over again, not satisfied with the answer. And Paxo asks it at least 12 times.
If I did not change my mind and suspend Marriott, he would have to consider overruling me.
Mr. Marriott...
You can't both be right.
Mr. Marriott was not suspended. I was entitled to express my views. I was entitled to be consulted.
Did you threaten to overrule him?
I was not entitled to instruct Derek Lewis, and I did not instruct him. And
did you threaten to overrule him?
The truth of the matter is that Mr. Marriott was not suspended.
Did you threaten to overrule him?
I did not overrule Derek Lewis.
Did you threaten to overrule him?
I took advice on what I could or could not do.
Did you threaten to overrule him, Mr. Howard?
Scrupulously in accordance with that advice. I did not overrule Derek Lewis.
Did you threaten to overrule him?
Mr. Marriott was not suspended.
Did you threaten to overrule him?
I have accounted for my decision to dismiss Derek Lewis.
Did you threaten to overrule him?
Detail before the House of Commons.
I note you're not answering the question whether you threatened to overrule him.
The important aspect of this, which it's very clear to bear in mind...
I'm sorry, I'm going to be frightfully rude, but...
Yes, you can...
I'm sorry. It's a quite straight yes or no.
You can put the question, and I will give you an answer.
Did you threaten to overrule him?
I discussed this matter with Derek Lewis. I gave him the benefit of my opinion. I gave him the benefit of my opinion in strong language. But I did not instruct him because I was not entitled to instruct him. I was entitled to express my opinion, and that is what I did.
With respect, that is not answering the question of whether you threatened to overrule him.
It's dealing with the relevant point, which is what I was entitled to do and what I was not entitled to do. And I have dealt with this in detail before the House of Commons and before the Select Committee.
But with respect, you haven't answered the question of whether you threatened to overrule him.
Well, you see, the question is, what was I entitled to do and what was I not entitled to do? I was not entitled to instruct him, and I did not do that. Right.
That's great, isn't it? Because so he does all of the things he says in there. What the important thing is, to be clear, and the question that I did, the important question is about this. All the things that he's desperately trying to do, rather than just say, we obviously did threaten him, didn't he?
Yeah.
Rather than say yes. He could have saved that whole thing. He could just, exactly. He's saying, well, I was entitled to express my opinion. Yeah, that's not, but did you threaten him? It's just so good. And then that bit where he says, I'm sorry, I'm just going to be rude. Can you just say yes or no?
Yes. Yeah. Such an English way of being frightfully rude.
Going to be frightfully rude. Can you just, I'm going to ask you the question. You're not answering the question. Ask me the question and I will give you an answer. And then he asks him the same question and he gives the same answer. He doesn't answer it. It's just, and does the great big obfuscation by saying, not only am I not answering the question, I'm actually telling you that the question you're asking isn't the one you should be asking, because that he's asking you for an answer I'm not prepared to give. Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's great. And the lovely thing was when Paxman left the program in 2012, they did a kind of greatest hits montage with an update. It was a bit like a Morecambe Wise show with an update. And there was a little bit where Michael Howard came back into the studio, like however many years later, 15 years later, and Paxman just said, "Did you?" To which he gave no answer, of course.
But also kind of sad when we take the bits out of them because their arguments are bad. We find it hard to fathom that Trump is such a child. When people talk in riddles, it's a fallacy. In the wild, it's a fallacy. In the wild, a fallacy. In the wild, a fallacy. In the wild.
As it's getting longer and longer.
I'm
going to be releasing an album soon.
Exactly, yeah. Well, that did occur to me because when we got into that at the 80s thing, which suits my voice quite nicely, that I thought, we could put one out. But that one, it's a strange song because the chorus is led into by a whole bunch of really nice lines. So I'm starting to write lyrics for the verse now. But there we go. Yeah, the proper Tears for Fear version. Never mind your bloody Gary Jules, the proper one.
In the Fallacy in the Wild, we like to talk about the fallacy of the week from a non-political perspective. And this week's first example is from The Simpsons.
Yeah.
When Lisa asks Marge this.
Mom? What? Why am I still rotting away in the second grade instead of being skipped ahead?
I don't know, I guess that's the school's decision to make.
Well, did you ever talk to anyone at the school? Make a few calls on my behalf? Maybe you could have been nicer to Principal Skinner, if you know what I mean.
Lisa, I am nice.
Well, there's a bit of cherry picking going on as well, wasn't there? Out of all those things, which bit can I actually answer truthfully?
Yeah. So that's the point, is which is the point of what Lisa is trying to say. The question that she's asking is, why haven't you done more to get me advanced to the next grade?
Yeah.
And the answer that Marge gives is to the one section there where she's implying she's not nice enough to the principal. So
yeah. Well,
it's maybe a fair answer. It's a valid.
Well, it kind of doesn't even answer the nicer to Principal Skinner, which she does with air quotes. It's not. It doesn't even answer that, does it? You just kind of gone rapid kind of Rolodex, fingering through the leaves of all the argument, and then pulls one out and goes, "I am nice." Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And that's all she can say. I mean, you can't disagree with that because she is.
Yeah, it's a bit like when someone's called, fat, old, and ugly, and the person says, "I don't think you're old."
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So, example number 2 in this section is kind of slightly political, I suppose, because it comes from a tweet that I answered.
Yay!
Basically, Charlie Kirk, who is in charge of Turning Point USA, very big Trump supporter, and lies constantly on Twitter. He tweeted, "Fact: CO2 emissions just hit a 67-year low in US as rest of the world rises. Clean burning natural gas and domestic energy exploration has resulted in everything the environmentalists pretend to care about. Thank you, real Donald Trump." So I pointed out, because I like to troll Charlie Kirk every now and again. He never pays any attention to anything I say, but his followers sometimes do. So, so it's sometimes fun. And I pointed out that he should really look up what the word fact means, because CO2 emissions didn't just hit a 67-year low. That was in 2017, before Trump's energy policies had any time to take effect. But they rose again in 2018 to a higher level than they were under Obama.
Aha.
So that was replied to by one of Charlie Kirk's followers. And the reply was, this is from someone called Woke Folk.
Right.
And he said, "The Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old. I don't think it cares which administration is in office." And that is fair.
Yeah.
That is a valid point. It isn't anything to do with what we were talking about.
No, absolutely not.
Because we were talking about CO2 emissions.
Yeah.
And the danger that they pose. By implication, we didn't actually get into that, but the implication was that higher CO2 levels are bad.
Yeah.
They're not bad for the Earth. The Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years-ish. Yeah. It doesn't care who's in office. It doesn't care how high the CO2 levels are.
No.
Humans do.
Yeah.
Because we won't survive.
Yeah.
The Earth will keep going.
Yeah. Because there was a time when there was nothing but CO2, and there was a life form I came across in Australia called stromatolites that actually effectively poisoned the atmosphere by turning CO2 into oxygen. So they filled for the first 2 billion years of life, the atmosphere was carbon dioxide, and then they filled it with oxygen.
There were times in prehistory when the CO2 level was like 10 times higher than it is now.
Yeah.
And there was still life. There was different life. It wasn't human life.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of life. And
it was life, Jim, but not as we know it.
And arguments I got into with other followers about on this topic went off on that tangent. And what those people are missing is the fact that CO2 isn't the only thing that controls climate. It's a factor. It's an important factor. But there were other things that were different back then. We're talking about millions of years ago.
Yeah. Pre-Trump. Yeah.
Yeah. And the fact that there was, like, during even the Cambrian explosion and periods where there was enormous amounts of life going on, there were very, very high levels of CO2. But there were other factors in the atmosphere and the activity of the sun and stuff like that meant that the temperatures weren't that much higher than they are now. They were higher, and that meant that the sea levels were higher, which, again, didn't affect the dinosaurs and the life that was around at the time, but would definitely affect people living in Miami.
Yeah.
So it's not a time that we want to go back to. It's not what we want for now, but it was fine then. And it didn't mean that all life on Earth was wiped out, but conditions were different then.
Though ironically or coincidentally, a lot of the people that live in Miami are dinosaurs.
True. So the last example is about quite a common thing that is done in law programs, in court programs, on TV and in films. Yeah. I don't suspect this is really done in real life courtrooms, but it is when lawyers describe how bad the effects of the crime was, rather than pointing out evidence that shows that the person accused of the crime actually did it.
Right. Yeah.
And it's an argument from emotion. It tells the jury that they should care about the victim or should care about what happened to the victim, but it it is missing the point. It is irrelevant to whether the person who is accused of the crime actually committed the crime.
Yeah.
There is a great example in a wonderful film called Judgement at Nuremberg, it was a 60s film by Stanley Kramer, with a great cast. Spencer Tracy and Richard Widmark and just loads of great people. Anyway, I'm not going to play a clip from it because the relevant scene is about kind of 5 or 6 minutes long.
Right.
The film is about a trial of some judges who were accused of kind of supporting the Holocaust and the Hitler's administration, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it's based on a real court case. One of the witnesses shows film of the camps, the concentration camps, when they were liberated, and the bodies that were bulldozed into pits and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's very emotional. It shows all of the horrors of what happened. And it has absolutely nothing to do with whether these particular judges did anything that was illegal.
Yeah. It attempts to close the gap by making you do the work, or making you not see the need to ask that question. Okay, this is all very well and it's horrific and awful, and we know this stuff happened because it was filmed. We've seen it, and we appreciate that it's ghastly and awful, and the people who perpetrated it should be brought to justice. But where is the causal connection, if you like, between what you're showing us and these people here who are standing accused of it? You haven't shown us the direct link. And in a way, in the other, the earlier political examples, a similar thing is being done by both Trump and Theresa May, in that they are giving you the bare bones. They're appealing to you as though you are a convert to their ideas by just going, well, certainly Theresa May does it when she said, well, you know from our records that we are very good with the economy. It's Labour who are shirking their responsibilities, and you ought to be asking this question of. And she is implying that you should just go, yes, you're absolutely right. I'm not going to question anything else that you say. But in this case, Andrew Neil doesn't. He says, well, yeah, but you still haven't answered the question. So in Judgment at Nuremberg, we get to see this awful stuff, and yet the prosecution doesn't make the link to say, and these people were directly involved in this because here is the evidence of them being employed to do it.
Yeah, I mean, they're judges, so they were making judgments that enabled it to happen. But and to be fair to them, they definitely do make those arguments at other points in the film.
Yeah.
But this particular witness and this particular footage that is shown is very emotional and has an effect on the people making the decision in the case, but doesn't actually go to whether the people are guilty or not.
And also because it's as part of the film, because you don't just see it projected on the wall. It becomes diegetic, as you know, from being non-diegetic. You get to witness this stuff all over again in 1961. And we're barely 20 years
real
on.
Footage,
as
well. It was quite dramatic and controversial at the time. But they used actual footage of.
So there's something about alerting woking those folk, alerting that generation, the post-war generation, to the fact that this went on, and people need to be brought to book for it, which was going on at the time. So
highly recommend the film. It should be on school syllabuses to watch, in my opinion.
So we're gonna play
fake news, folks. I love the game. It's a great game.
I understand the game as well as anybody.
Yes, it's time for Fake News, the game where I read out 3 Trump quotes, 2 of which are real and 1 I made up, and Mark has to figure out which one is fake news.
Yeah, actually, before we go on, I think the important thing to note is that I won this many times in a row. That's what we should be focusing on.
Yeah, I think it's 2 in a row at the moment, isn't it?
If you look at the record of my performance, there have been several times when I've got 2 or 3, one after the other. And that's the important thing. Let me make this perfectly clear.
So the theme this week is a certain lack of preparation from Trump.
Right.
It's not always preparation. Sometimes it's just he's asked a question that he doesn't really have an answer to. And so he just blusters and panics.
Just fills the space.
So statement number 1, and this is in response to being asked, what does Easter mean to you?
Okay.
He said, well, it really means something very special. I'm going to church in an hour from now, and it's a beautiful church. I'm in Florida, and it's just a very special time for me. And it really represents family and get together and something, if you're a Christian, it's just a very important day.
Right.
So.
Okay. No mention of bunnies and chocolate there. Right. Yeah.
or Jesus.
Or anything. Yeah.
Number 2. He was asked, could you specify the ways you discussed to advance denuclearization with Chairman Kim?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, we discussed many ways, and the denuclearization is a very important word, become a very well-used word, and a lot of people don't know what it means. But to me, it's pretty obvious. We have to get rid of the nukes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's actually an Elenchi Ignoratio as well, isn't it? Kind of. Yeah.
He's answering the question, do you know what denuclearization
means? Yes, that's right. Can you specify the ways? Yeah.
And number 3, he was asked, do you plan to withdraw ground troops from Syria?
Yeah.
And he said, the thing with Syria, we've done an incredible job. We've totally, or almost totally, put a control on ISIS. We have to make sure we don't have the same problems we had in other parts of the Middle East. People maybe didn't know or didn't try to stop it, but I think nobody could have done what we've done.
Okay. I think everybody could have done what he's done, which is escalate matters. Okay. Quite like that one. Yeah, all right. It's a beautiful church. I'm in Florida. And, it's a very special time for me. And for most Christians, it's a very important day. Okay, Deacon Lee's right. You see, I take one look at him and I think, oh, blimey, that's really awful. He can't possibly have said that. Jim must have written that one. And then I can hear him saying it. And getting away with it and nobody holding him to account. Okay, having said that, okay, I'm going to plump for... I think number 2 is the one you made up.
Okay.
Much as I love it. And I would love him to have said it. Yeah.
So you think number 1 is real?
I do.
And number 1 is real.
Oh, my God.
He said that this week.
What does Easter mean to you? What's the Trump family Easter tradition?
No.
Well, it really means something very special. I'm going to church in an hour from now, and it's going to be it's a beautiful church. I'm in Florida. And it's just a very special time for me, and it really represents family and get together and something, if you're a Christian, it's just a very important day.
He does not know what he's
something, if you're a Christian. It really represents family and get together. Oh, shit, no, that's Thanksgiving, isn't it? Oh, no. Yeah, oh, well, this is, yeah. And then did you see him on the balcony with Melania and the rabbit?
And the rabbit, yeah.
And there's something kind
talking about military depleted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's something very Donnie Darko
who were there for the Easter egg roll.
Exactly. Yeah. So good. Okay.
So you think number 3 is real?
I think nobody could have done what we've done. That one, yeah, I think that's real.
And number 3 is fake news.
Oh, wow. Well done. Nice. That is great because it's got the right mix of reality and complete vagueness. Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. I love that. Maybe people didn't know. or didn't try to stop it. I think nobody could have done what we've done. It's just such a brilliantly Trump phrase. It contains no substance whatsoever, but sounds...
That's what I was going for.
Yeah.
There's an answer that contained absolutely no information.
Yeah, but sounds... Well, in this day and age, we're looking at that kind of stuff, and so I can't believe I'm saying it. It sounds presidential. No, it sounds like Trump. Oh, wow. Oh, my God. So that means
that number 2
is real. No way. No.
And could you elaborate on the options and the various ways that you discussed with Chairman Kim to advance denuclearization? Could you specify?
We discussed many ways, and the denuclearization is a very important word, become a very well-used word. And a lot of people don't know what it means, but to me it's pretty obvious. We have to get rid of the nukes.
What the hell? No, it's a brilliant question, isn't it? You said you brought world peace, in North Korea, not just shaking hands with, it's like he's prospecting to join the Hells Angels, so he's hanging about with other Hells Angels.
Dictators.
Yeah, with the other dictators. He's wearing the colours, and all that stuff, but they're just he's not going to be allowed to join. And so all he's got is prospect written over his left nipple, and he goes around, hangs around, and then people say, okay, so you've come over here, you're going to talk with the North Korean leader, dictator, president, honorary son, number one son, and then you maintain you've brought about the kind of peace guarantee that nobody's been able to broker for years and years and years. Be specific about what you said to him, because we know from the satellite pictures no denuclearization is going on. And instead of going, we did this, we did that, we laid it out, it's going to be this kind of a timetable, this is how we're going to monitor it, this is how we're going to make sure that they are complying. He just says a lot of people don't know what denuclearization means. Yeah, we do.
A lot of people don't know what it means. Yeah. That's the question that was asked.
Yeah, we do. We do know what it means. Well, I do. It's pretty obvious. We're going to get... No, really? Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Thanks for going all the way over to North Korea and shaking hands with Rocket Man. And, what? No way. Sometimes winning brings no joy when you know that those things are true and out there. I wish you'd written all of them and that they were none of them real. Oh my God.
Oh dear. So unfortunately, that does mean that you lost this week.
Yeah.
Which brings.
I'm near a pie.
Nearer.
Yeah, 8 over 23.
Or 1 over pi it was. 7 over 22.
Yeah,
but yes.
8 over 23.
8 over 23 now.
Yeah.
Which is 35%. So you're still above chance.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah.
But you had an opportunity there to get almost 40%. And
oh, man.
Well, you blew it, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, but the most important thing to focus on is the fact that you wrote a really good one. Yeah.
So, podcast listeners, I need your help to full mark. If you think you can make up a convincing fake Trump quote, then share this episode on Twitter, include your quote and the hashtag Fallacious Trump. I'll pick the best one and you'll be podcast famous.
Hi, I'm Mike from the Genuine Chit-Chat podcast, where we have honest conversations with interesting people. I speak to a wide variety of guests, including CEOs of businesses, psychologists, authors, musicians, travellers, people suffering with physical and mental illnesses, and everyone in between. Where we speak about a large variety of topics, including music and movies and pop culture, but also some more controversial topics, including drug reform, political correctness, and many more. No subject is off limits. You can find us on all the usual podcast places, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, as well as on YouTube. And you can follow us in all the usual social media places. And to be clear, I don't expect everyone listening to enjoy every episode of my show. What I do think is that due to the wide variety of guests and topics, that there'll be at least one episode that each person listening will enjoy. So if you still appreciate the art of conversation and want to hear honest conversations with interesting people, then be sure to check out Genuine Chit-Chat in all the usual places.
So it's time for the part of the show that this week, at least, is called The Mueller Report is Not a Logical Fallacy, but as we suspected, Bill Barr's summary was a really good example of cherry picking.
It so was. Yeah. Yeah. It's a great thing.
Yeah. Back in episode 22, we talked about cherry picking fallacy, and we talked about Bill Barr's summary of the Mueller report, which at the time we suspected didn't tell the whole story.
Yeah, because how many pages is the Mueller report?
448.
Yeah, how long was Barr's? 2?
About 3.5 pages.
Yeah. Yeah, and lots of that were, thanks to the publisher. Yeah, I'd like to thank my mum, the spell checker. Yeah.
And as we noted, it contained a few quotes that were, in fact, it didn't contain a single full sentence quote. It contained 3 quotes from the Mueller report, and each one was a partial quote, part of a sentence.
And when the report came out, was that the first thing that you did? So, I mean, as soon as it came out, I downloaded it and then looked at the, even in the table of contents, the HOM stuff, the harm to ongoing matter.
Harm to ongoing matters,
So there is stuff that's redacted because there's stuff that's live. And I suspect it's not, presidential policy being enacted, but more investigations upon the criminal man sitting in the Oval Office. Those are the ongoing matters.
Well, yeah, and first of all, I watched Bill Barr's press conference.
Yeah,
in which he came out and kind of set up the report before anyone had seen it, which is basically like taking your report card home and saying, "Okay, before you read this, there's just a few things I want to say." Because if you're expecting straight A's, that's totally what you do.
Yeah. In a very
I just need to put this in context.
In a very Ignoratio Elenchi kind of way. Going, I'm really
here's what's important for you to get out of this.
I'm really smart. I have my shoes are polished. I go to gym class every time we have gym class. I do that. I cheer for the right team, everything, and I eat all my lunch. So, you know how good a student I am. So bearing all of that in mind, now read the report.
So I watched the press conference and I downloaded the report, and the Justice Department had scanned, I presume, or it was images basically. It was not searchable text.
Yeah.
So that was the version that they released.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It can't possibly have been given to them by Mueller as like
PDFs.
paper.
Right.
report.
Okay. Yeah.
He must have given them an electronic version, and they just must have made it an image-based PDF to make it hard for people to find the bits.
To unredact the redacted bits. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. And then some very helpful sources created a searchable version of the PDF, and at that point, the first thing I did was go to the quotes that we talked about.
I think we probably weren't the only people to do that. Yeah. but I know, and it's just so revelatory, isn't it? We just knew.
Well, it's a lot. We said it would be irresponsible to speculate on how bad the other parts of the sentence might be.
Yeah.
But to be honest, it was a lot worse than I thought.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's get to it. The first quote that Barr quoted, he said, "The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities." And that was the end of a sentence.
Yeah.
The actual sentence is a little bit more detailed, and it starts, "Although the investigation established that the Russian government perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and worked to secure that outcome, and that the campaign expected it would benefit electorally from information stolen and released through Russian efforts, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities." So, so what it's saying is although we don't have evidence that particular members of the Trump campaign specifically talked to people in the Russian government and had a quid pro quo relationship with them,
there was a perception going on and an expectation going on.
Yeah, absolutely. We did establish that the Russians definitely helped them, and that the campaign knew about it and expected the help.
Yeah.
That's pretty bad.
I mean, I don't know why that's any different from where is the nuance that makes
Mueller,
that not conspiracy?
The thing is, all of this stuff that Trump is saying about how Mueller is out to get him and all, about how this report was written by 13 angry Democrats or 17 angry Democrats or 18 angry Democrats, depending on which day he says it, is actually, when you look at it, Mueller and his team set a very high bar for finding a problem with what Trump did or classifying what Trump did and his team did as not collusion, because as they say in the report, collusion isn't a legal term, but coordination or conspiracy. And they said that basically they thought that needed more than two or more people benefiting from responding to each other's actions.
Right.
And that was what they found, was that happening.
Yeah.
But that didn't, for them, rise to the level of criminal conspiracy or coordination. But they did find that the Russians helped get Trump elected.
Yeah.
And that basically, in many cases, although they at times shied away from contact with the Russians, in many cases they welcomed it.
Yeah.
So
and in the expectation that they would benefit from it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, which was and that was established. It wasn't just that wasn't just kind of the investigation established that. Wow.
So the second sentence that Barr quoted, which at the time we thought was not actually that great for Trump.
Exactly.
He said, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him.
Yeah.
This was what Trump said was total exoneration.
Yeah.
Now, actually, there's only one more word in that sentence. It should start with accordingly.
Yeah.
While this report and so on. Obviously, that doesn't make sense out of context, and that's why they took the accordingly out.
Yeah.
So if you put it in some context and include the previous couple of sentences, Mueller is laying out a list of things talking about obstruction of justice. This is in volume 2 of the report, page 2, where they're talking about obstruction of justice. It says, fourth, if we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. Based on the facts and the applicable legal standards, however, we are unable to reach that judgment. The evidence we obtained about the president's actions and intent presents difficult issues that prevent us from conclusively determining that no criminal conduct occurred. Accordingly, while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him.
That's really bad, isn't it?
Mueller is specifically saying, we looked into it, we tried to be able to say he didn't commit a crime.
Yeah.
If we were confident he didn't commit a crime, we would say that he didn't commit a crime.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that they're talking about in terms of being unable to reach a judgment, in the Barr summary, Barr talks about how he and Rosenstein didn't take into account the Office of Legal Counsel's opinion and the Justice Department's kind of general practice that you can't indict a sitting president.
Yeah.
Mueller specifically says that they did take that into account. Mueller and his team did, in making their non-traditional prosecutorial decisions, which were ultimately deciding not to indict him.
Yeah.
Was that they said that the reason they didn't do that, or part of the reason they didn't do that, was the OLC decision. So that's part of the difficult issues that they're talking about in preventing them from conclusively determining that a crime occurred, or that he can be indicted, or that no criminal conduct occurred.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's pretty bad too.
And the thing is that it's saying, they've tried as hard, they've tried thorough investigation of the facts. If we had confidence that after this thorough investigation of the facts, he did not commit. And that's the whole thing. That what is it coming to? I think we said it before. What does it come to when you've got to find it really hard that he didn't commit something? Normally you want it the other way around. You kind of go, well, we found it really hard to find that he did. rather than the other way around. It's kind of the implication of that is part of the difficulty is there's so much stuff we found. It was really hard, constitutionally we couldn't prosecute him for this stuff because it was if you read it the other way around, it's so bloody obvious that he's committed stuff that we couldn't establish that he. Conclusively that he did not.
Mueller in the report does lay out in great detail 10 instances of potential obstruction of justice, and he lays out the idea that actually this is for Congress to deal with because of the fact that he's the president, and that's dealt with in this next one actually, because the final quote from the Barr summary was that the investigation, quote, did not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to a Russian election interference. Now, this is big for Barr because Barr was saying that since there wasn't an underlying crime, there couldn't really be obstruction of justice.
Yeah,
because there was no crime to obstruct the investigation of. That, as I said a couple of weeks ago, is an unusual reading of the law, and is certainly not Mueller's reading.
Yeah,
and this is a longer quote because I want to really put this in context. It's not fair to just read the sentence that includes this quote. So this is again from Volume 2 about obstruction of justice, and it says, several features of the conduct we investigated distinguish it from typical obstruction of justice cases. First, the investigation concerned the president, and some of his actions, such as firing the FBI director, involved facially lawful acts within his Article 2 authority, which raises constitutional issues discussed below. At the same time, the president's position as the head of the executive branch provided him with unique and powerful means of influencing official proceedings, subordinate officers, and potential witnesses, all of which is relevant to a potential obstruction of justice analysis. Second, unlike cases in which a subject engages in obstruction of justice to cover up a crime, the evidence we obtained, and here's the quote, did not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to Russian election interference. Although the obstruction statutes do not require proof of such a crime, the absence of that evidence affects the analysis of the president's intent and requires consideration of other possible motives for his conduct. So Barr very strongly implied in his letter that Mueller was saying that the lack of an underlying crime meant that the intent question of whether Trump deliberately obstructed justice or with corrupt intent was affected by that. And Mueller is saying it is affected by that in as much as you need to look at whether there were other motives other than covering up a crime. It doesn't remove the obstruction of justice. It just is saying the obstruction of justice in this case wasn't about covering up a crime.
It distinguished it from typical obstruction of justice cases.
Specifically. And what he talks about in the report in a lot more detail is about how it may have been covering up things that the president might have thought would be crimes, or things that would just look bad for him politically. And that's absolutely what happened with Clinton. Was when he was trying to cover up his affair, basically, and that was what they were trying to impeach him for. That wasn't criminal activity. That was just something that would be politically bad for him, and so he wanted it not to come out. That doesn't prevent him being impeached.
Quite.
And the question of whether he should be impeached is another question which is being debated by presidential candidates and by everyone involved at the moment. And we shall see what the outcome of that is. I kind of come down on the side of, even though it may potentially be politically, I don't really honestly think it is going to be politically bad for the Democrats to instigate impeachment proceedings. But even if it was, I kind of think there's a moral imperative to do it because there's such a lot of evidence that he did things which were either illegal. I think there's a lot of evidence for that, or at the very least unethical, immoral, and not the kinds of things that you hope the president will do.
Yeah, I mean, and just even if the obstruction of justice was purely about preventing Mueller from investigating, wielding the executive power in a way that it ought not to be wielded, conjures up memories of Richard Nixon, who did just that, and that was what did for him. You know, even if there's no crime that Mueller discovered, the fact they did discover he was in a position to bring about lots of obstructive activities, which he ought not to have been doing. And so there's the if they don't do it, if they don't go through with the impeachment proceedings, then it sets a precedent. It says that the behavior that Trump has, exhibited and been bragging about, getting away with, then becomes acceptable for future presidents. It then becomes,
I think
the
that's
norm for the Republicans.
Danger.
Yeah,
I think there's an argument that impeachment proceedings take a long time. It's very complicated, and it will be a big thing. And there is the argument that he will get voted out in 2020, and once he leaves office, he can be indicted criminally. And that would be a deterrent for future presidents acting in the same way. But yes, I do think there is an argument as well that if you do not impeach, if you do not take this very, very seriously, that he will continue to do the same thing and worse, and future presidents will think, well, obviously I can get away with just about anything now. And that's really not what you want.
Yeah, because in a way, what Mueller is saying is, don't forget the rule book. This is the rule book, and Trump is tearing it up because he's hiding behind the fact that you can't impeach me because you can't indict me. I'm a sitting president. You can't, then we need to change the rules.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of lawyers who disagree that you can't indict a sitting president and would be prepared to challenge that ruling.
Yeah.
But Mueller seems to accept that. But he does lay out in some detail the idea that actually what is needed is a constitutional solution, which is basically impeachment proceedings.
Because I think he was quite clever in taking note of and being regarding of the current status quo. He's not he's being treading carefully so he can't be seen to be riding roughshod over what's acceptable current practice, vis-a-vis you can't indict a sitting president. He's saying, notwithstanding
he's been extremely cautious. And in fact, to the point where some people are asking, if he saw things which he thought were crimes that he would indict anyone who wasn't the president for, why didn't he say that? And he addresses that directly. He basically, in saying, here's why I'm not saying he definitely committed a crime. He's saying that it's important in terms of fairness because the legal process of going to trial not only gives the prosecutors an opportunity to make their case and prosecute people who are guilty, but it gives innocent people a chance to clear their name and to answer their case in court. And in this kind of scenario where you're not indicting him, it would be unfair to say he committed these crimes because it doesn't give him an opportunity, because he's not going to be indicted, to clear his name. It's not going to stop him, obviously.
But he's avoiding being Mueller's avoiding being accused of being judge and jury by being very cautious in that respect and respecting the rule of law. He's saying, I'm an investigator. I'm not a lawyer being employed to indict, impeach, prosecute. I'm not doing that. What I'm doing is setting out the case from which prosecutors can take, in the UK, then that the Crown Prosecution Service would look at the evidence and go, right, there is enough here to bring a case against the person being reported on. You know, that's what would happen.
We've been talking about this for a while. We've talked about the Barr summary quotes. There's other stuff I want to talk about, but I think we're going to have to draw it to a close here. But I think this week's Patreon subscribers will probably get a more extended episode than usual.
Yeah.
Because there's a few more things we want to talk about. So if you're not already a patron, you can go to patreon.com/ftrump, and the extended version of this episode will have a little bit more from the Mueller report.
And finally, some things we really don't have time to talk about.
Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter posted a video to Facebook and Twitter last week showing how easy it is to cross the Mexican border into Arizona. In the video, Hunter stepped over a waist-high fence, saying, "This is what we expect to stop people, transnational terrorists, families, all illegal aliens from coming over the border. This is it." But it wasn't. What he crossed was a vehicle barrier located in the US, about 100 feet from the actual border. But he did have a good reason for faking it. If Hunter's name sounds familiar, it might be because in episode 7, we talked about his indictment for using $250,000 of campaign funds for personal purchases and then blaming it all on his wife. So if he had in fact stepped into Mexico to make the video, he would have been in violation of his bail.
Okay, so you know that thing we had a problem with when Bush and Blair interfered in a foreign power on foreign soil, and they were strongly advised that it was illegal to do so by lots of professionals. What are they called? Oh, yeah, lawyers. Well, Trump's actual attorney at law, Rudy, just hold the line a minute whilst I cover my ass, Giuliani, on CNN's State of the Union, said there's nothing wrong with taking information from Russians. I think he understandably confusing asking for directions on the St. Petersburg metro with, say, treason. And when asked if he would have taken information from a foreign source, he said, "I probably wouldn't," adding, "I wasn't asked. And I would have advised, just out of excessive caution, don't do it." Much to unpack there, but mostly the complete absence of objectivity around the rule of law, which we'd take up with him if we weren't being deafened by the sound of him metaphorically running in the opposite direction away from Trump.
Former Minnesota Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann has described Trump as highly biblical, adding, "We will in all likelihood never see a more godly biblical president again in our lifetime." I actually agree. Assuming, of course, that she's talking about Old Testament God, who Richard Dawkins once described as arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynist, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. I think filicidal's probably going a bit far, but the rest is surprisingly apropos.
Isn't it? Good old Smokey the Bear and Thunderbird 2 pilot Donald Trump bludgeoned his way onto the international stage with his forest conflagration raking wisdom when he advised dropping tons of water from a great height to extinguish the burning Notre Dame. Parisian firefighters were red-faced when they realised it turns out that the cathedral is on a lone hill by an airstrip miles from people, tall buildings or electrically powered metropolises and made of a solid lump of metal. So that would work perfectly, rather than what they had thought for longer than America had actually existed, that it is actually an ancient, mostly delicately filigreed limestone, latticed wood and fragile, multifaceted glass structure filled with irreplaceable textile and paper-based artefacts 2 feet from the river.
This week, Trump said this to reporters.
I have been the most transparent president and administration in the history of our country by far.
Meanwhile, in literally the same exchange, he announced he would be fighting all the subpoenas coming from House committees. Just this week, the White House has refused to allow evil Pee Wee Herman Stephen Miller to testify about immigration policies and instructed Carl Klein, John Gore and Don McGahn to ignore subpoenas to testify about security clearances, citizenship questions and the Mueller report, respectively. Steve Mnuchin is refusing to release Trump's tax return to the Ways and Means Committee, and Trump is suing his own accountants to prevent the House Oversight Committee seeing his financial documents. To be fair, the motivation behind this is all pretty transparent.
There you go. Humanitarian Nobel Prize winner in waiting, surely, former Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen apparently had been making it a priority for the White House to take more serious steps to prepare for further interference from Russia in the 2020 election. Whilst this may be I did try to do some good things but was thwarted report that we warned against last episode, it does make for good reading that whilst Homeland Security has observed continued attempts by the Russians to interfere with the electoral process in 2018 and beyond, White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney warned Kirstjen not to bring these plans up to the president himself. Mick believes, as do we all, that Trump still sees public discussion of Russian interference as questioning the legitimacy of Trump's victory in 2016. Mulvaney apparently said it wasn't a great subject and should be kept below his level. Such constant roadblocks put up by Mulvaney and others eventually led Nielsen to give up on the meeting despite the DHS's cybersecurity responsibilities. Ah, well, bless her, she tried. What a trooper. Thanks, Kirst.
No, I won't hear it. We have to not say anything good about Kirstjen Nielsen. She's a horrible, horrible person. Meanwhile, remember that weird poll we discussed in episode 18 where 2% of people said they'd never heard of Donald Trump?
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's a new one out, and it's a lot worse for Mike Pence. Turns out 12% of people are completely unaware of his existence, including 6% of people who identify themselves as Republicans and 11% of conservatives. Let's just take a moment and imagine how great it would be to be one of those people who'd never heard of Mike Pence.
Oh, yeah.
No, I can't cope with the level of stupid that inevitably comes with that.
As a society, we probably collectively embrace Twitter's sterling efforts to algorithmically weed out ISIS and other terrorist postings on their platform and accept that in starving extremists of the oxygen of publicity, that might mean taking down some legitimate reporting from Al Jazeera and other genuine Arabic language organisations. Indeed, this view was expressed in an all-staff meeting by Twitter executives. But in the same meeting, Vice News reports one Twitter employee saying the site, and I quote, hasn't taken the same aggressive approach to white supremacist content because the collateral accounts that are impacted can, in some instances, be Republican politicians. Who knew? The employee argued that, on a technical level, content from the Republican politicians could get swept up by algorithms aggressively removing white supremacist material. Banning politicians wouldn't be accepted by society as a trade-off for flagging all of the white supremacist propaganda, he argued. Which bit of society? The bit that has two accounts, tweets peevishly at 4 a.m. to over 100 million followers on pages that carry adverts? That part of society, is it?
Yeah, I think if your Twitter account is indistinguishable from white supremacy...
Yeah.
Maybe there's a reason for that.
Yeah, then you are a duck. Yeah.
So that's all the bad arguments and faulty reasoning we have time for this episode. You can find the show notes at fallacioustrump.com. And if you hear Trump say something stupid and want to ask if it's a fallacy, our contact details are on the contact page.
If you think we've used a fallacy ourselves, let us know. And if you've had a good time, please give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And we're pleased to say that we've had 25,000 downloads across the whole podcast world. Thank you very much for doing that. And you can show further support for our show on the Patreon page at patreon.com/ftrump, just like our newest patrons, Andrew Dredge and Anne McKinley. Thanks for joining the gang, guys.
You can also connect with us and other listeners in the Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/fallacioustrump. And we'll also be putting on the show notes this week a link to the Genuine Chit-Chat podcast, which we played a promo for earlier in the episode.
All music is by The Outbursts and was used with permission. So until next time on Fallacious Trump, we'll leave the last word to the Donald.
That's right. Go home to mommy. Bye. Bye.